Hello and welcome to the Khayrion podcast, your guide to everything concerning the politics and business of the Middle East, North Africa, and beyond. Hello and welcome, dear listeners. My esteemed guest today is Professor László Csicsmann, and we are going to continue our discussion on the current pressing issues concerning the Israel-Hamas conflict. Welcome, Professor.
Hello, good afternoon.
My first question for today is, how do you expect the current events to shape the domestic policy, both in Israel and in Palestine, or more specifically in the Gaza Strip? Can we expect any significant switch in the population's attitude towards the leading elites, or possibly changes in leadership?
I think in Israel, what we recently seen is the establishment of the unity government in the recent days, which ended a year-long protest within the Israeli society. So even those politicians who are critical with Prime Minister Netanyahu's political rule since December, they are very positively supporting all the decisions against eliminating Hamas. So it seems there is a minimum consensus in the Israeli society that first and foremost, the most important question is to fight against Hamas and to reestablish Israel's deterrence against regional actors like Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran, the so-called axis of resistance. And for this reason, in the short run, they take away their political problems and those issues which have been dividing the Israeli society since the last year. Just think about that. Very recently in December, two, I would say, right-wing politicians joined to the Israeli government, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. It was highly criticized by centrist political forces like Benny Gantz, but at this time, it was not a question when they have been formed this unity government, because the security issue comes first for the Israeli society, and just only after that, the political or economic issues. However, I would expect that after this conflict, which could have a long impact, of course, in Gaza and Israel, so it's not going to be just a one-month conflict, in my opinion, but a longer one, which we can even not estimate because it depends on the Israeli decision whether to occupy the Gaza Strip for a longer period or not. But however, those polarizing issues will return to the Israeli society. And definitely speaking, Netanyahu is not the most popular politician at this moment. He's highly criticized by many different political wings in Israel. And of course, there will be the question, how could it happen, what we saw with the Hamas attack, the intelligence service failure, the unpreparedness of the military, and a kind of confidence in the current Israeli government. No, there are voices, and especially because of the hostages, we saw some protest in Tel Aviv, especially because Hamas has been holding close to 200 hostages within the Gaza Strip, which is, of course, the most important issue for the majority of Israeli society, to see them back alive in Israel. So I would expect that within a few months, those polarization effect will return, and which will be much more complicated with the economic burden and economic cost of this whole Israeli-Hamas conflict. Definitely, we cannot say what's going to be the next step, but I think that a kind of elections after the conflict could be expected, which in a way, I would say, prolonged the Israeli political crisis, which started several years ago, which is not a good news, of course, because of the protests that we have been seeing during the last months. Well, in Palestine, definitely the situation is a bit different from the Israeli society, and we see a crisis of the governing or ruling elite, both in the Gaza Strip and I think both in the West Bank, in a very different way. So, and in the case of the West Bank, Mahmoud Abbas' goal was to internationalize the Palestinian conflict. But however, what we see, especially because of the Abraham Accords, there is less international or regional attention have been paid on the Palestinian issue. So this whole Palestinian issue is highly neglected in the region during the last year. It's mainly the Persian Gulf affair which thematized the political agenda of the region and less the Palestinian issue, in my opinion. And I think in the coming months, we would see a change, a kind of shift, because after this Israeli-Hamas attack, it's not anymore possible to neglect the Palestinian issue by the Gulf countries or by other Arab countries. And I expect that there will be attempts to have a new Palestinian leadership within Fatah, because definitely for the majority of Arab states, the situation is quite similar to the Israeli standpoint, that Hamas is an organization which is a terrorist organization. So both the Saudis or the Egyptian, I would say, not like this movement. And as I told recently, there is a younger generation among the Palestinians who, on one hand, they are much more, have a willingness to cooperate with Israel, because I think this is one of the main problems. There's a lack of any type of cooperation with the Israelis. And definitely it seems it's a whole failure what's going on in the West Bank. But however, the Gaza's young generation is critical with Hamas and the leaders. And especially, even I would say that many Gaza civilians are quite hostage to Hamas leadership, and quite interesting to see the divergence between the political and military leadership. We always think about Hamas and Fatah as just one monolithic movement. However, within Hamas, I would say there are different political and military wings with very different aspirations and goals. And because of what we saw in 2007, the political divide of the West Bank and Gaza Strip, the politicians, the political, more pragmatist leaders of Hamas left the Gaza Strip during the last years, and they now are in exile in Doha most of the time. For instance, the former political leader Khalid Mashal is in Doha, Ismail Haniyeh is in Doha, and some of the leaders are in Ankara too, so in Turkey, because these two countries, so mainly Turkey and Qatar, supported Hamas previously. And it is very important to mention that the whole Hamas movement has been marginalized after or during the Arab Spring, especially after the political events in Egypt in 2013, when with the help of Saudi Arabia, there was a soft coup against Mohamed Morsi's president, who is a member of the Muslim Brotherhood, a moderate Islamist movement. And we know that Hamas is a local wing in the Gaza Strip, originally of this umbrella movement. And the main difference, of course, is Hamas is a radical armed group, while Muslim Brotherhood is more a political party. But however, in Egypt, this movement has been banned, and it was labeled as terrorist group even by Saudi Arabia, which had an impact on Hamas, a regional marginalization. And I think with this attack, Hamas tried to shape its role as a more important political actor. And we will see, of course, the consequence of this attack. But however, I think now the whole Hamas movement is dominated by the military wing, which is not much more cooperative with Israel according to its ideology. But however, it's quite interesting to see that very recently, during this summer, there were some very positive news coming from the Gaza Strip, in which Hamas was in a way cooperative with Israel and Egypt as well. Let me mention just the Palestinian guest workers. They, on a daily basis, several hundreds could pass the border to Israel, because Israel is very much in a need of workforce. And from the Egyptian side, there was a kind of plan to have an infrastructure project building roads and a port, because close to the Gaza Strip there is an offshore gas field which could help the Gaza Strip to develop economically more. And Hamas and Islamic Jihad both were partners in this process. So it was a surprise what happened, because in July, I remember from the news, there were some secret talks, indirect talks, which Egypt mediated between Israel, Hamas, and Islamic Jihad. And just few months after that, this happened, this terror attack against Israeli civilians.
How do you expect these projects to continue from now on?
I think no. In the foreseeable future, I'm not optimistic about that. Of course, Egypt realized that blockade is not a good idea for the long run. So providing potential for Gaza Strip to develop more, it can ensure Egyptian security even more. So this is the reason behind this project. However, under any type of military intervention which is going on now, whether it's by air or any land intervention by the Israeli forces, in the short run at least can halt all these type of projects.
Okay, thank you very much. You basically took away my next question. How do you think all these events, including the heightened military presence of the US in the region right now, influenced and will influence the Eastern Mediterranean energy infrastructure? What developments do you expect in this field?
First of all, previously the Israeli-Hamas escalation, there was a huge potential in the Eastern Mediterranean project, I would say, because we see an increased cooperation between Israel, Cyprus, Egypt, Jordan, even Lebanon in a way. And the most important country here is Turkey, which not supported this whole project in 2019. However, very recently, Turkey has normalized its relations with Israel too, which is really a quite positive energy hub, what we see here. You know, it's important to mention here that there is a lack of capacity how to transport the gas to Europe or to other parts of the world, which forced to a certain kind of cooperation, the regional actors. So Israel, of course, part of the Israeli production is for Israeli consumption, internal consumption. However, the rest could be exported, but however, it's not easy to export because there is no such kind of pipeline at this moment to transport it to Europe or to other parts of Asia. And for this reason, Israel is exporting this gas through a Jordanian pipeline to Egypt. Egypt has liquefaction capacity, and Egypt re-export the Israeli gas to Europe or to other countries. However, the problem is that very recently, due to security reasons, Israel has decided to shut down one of the largest gas fields, which is not far from the Gaza Strip. This is the Tamar gas field, which provided more than half of the Israeli production. And it's going to make a huge problem, not only for Israel, but for the region too. Because what we expect from now is that more and more Israeli remaining production is for internal consumption, because there is a need in Israel for gas, and we see a lack of capacity now, which means that Jordan imported gas from Israel, and there is no capacity anymore for that. So it's not only for the Egyptian liquefaction facility, but I think it's a problem for the Jordanians' economy as well, which signed many agreements with Israel about Israel's going to provide in the next 25 years Jordan with natural gas. So there is a need for alternative sources on the one hand, and the other problem which I see here is the Lebanese production, because there is a huge potential in the Lebanese offshore gas field. And just a year ago, we saw a US broker, I wouldn't say peace, but a kind of demarcation of border between sea borders between Israel and Lebanon. So it was a kind of indirect talks mediated by Washington. And it was quite successful. you know that there is no peace agreement between Lebanon and Israel. And Lebanon is still the country which is not recognizing Israel's existence. However, it was a kind of pragmatic approach that Lebanon is in a dire need of economic investment, and natural gas is one of the most important potential. So previously, the Hamas attack, what we have been witnessing is an increasing infrastructural project. However, after the attack, immediately most of this project came to a halt, and I would expect in the foreseeable future that these investments, infrastructural investments in the gas field, unfortunately could not be possible because there is a need of a kind of cooperation between Israel and Lebanese authorities, which expect, of course, Washington's mediation and a lot of other things. So for the next couple of months, I think any kind of escalation would not help this regional situation. And not to mention, one of the main questions here is whether to construct the so-called EastMed pipeline or not to construct. It's a project which decided by the European and supported by the European Commission as one of the most important flagship projects to diversify its natural gas import, not to rely only on Russian gas, but to find alternative sources. But it's very complicated and not much feasible, this project at this moment. It's a 2,000 kilometers long expected pipeline starting underwater from Cyprus, reaching to Italy at some point. However, there are a lot of concerns about this project, environmental issues, of course, the cost of this project, and security geopolitical issues, of course. And, European Union has decided a whole decarbonization. So there is a Green Deal adopted recently. So from an environmental perspective, it's a question whether to invest in such a long-term project like the EastMed or not. So there are many questions there, but it's still, I would say, a huge potential if there is a de-escalation that all projects could restart in a way.
My next question is, how do you expect the current events to affect the Middle East normalization process?
I think this is the most interesting questions. Since 2020, we see very positive signs from the Middle East, which is a home of durable conflict in time and in duration and in capacity. But since 2020, Israel has started a positive normalization process. Israel has signed the so-called Abraham Accords with 4 countries at that time, with the United Arab Emirates, with Bahrain, and later Morocco and Sudan joined as well. And especially in the first 2 cases, we saw a very positive results of this cooperation. For instance, around 1 million Israeli tourists entered to the United Arab Emirates in 3 years, which is, I think, a quite surprise. It's a huge number. I'm not sure whether all of them just stayed in the United Arab Emirates or used Dubai or Abu Dhabi as a transit point, but I think it's an amazing number. Not to mention the investments and bilateral trade is on the rise, so it's really quite positive. It's not the same with Sudan, which is in a political transition, but I would say that the most important goal from the Israeli perspective and from Washington perspective is to reach an agreement with Saudi Arabia, which is the most important country for Israel in the region. During the summer, with the mediation of the Biden government, they started the talk, and Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, just a few days before the Hamas attack said, "We're getting closer day by day, step by step. Of course, not reached an agreement yet, but the situation is quite positive." And then came the attack, which of course was the interests of Hamas and it was the interest of Iran. to stop all these negotiations, which I would say, of course, we see a kind of break in those negotiations in the next few weeks or months. It depends on the escalation process of this whole conflict. If there is a durable intervention in the Gaza Strip and Israel will occupy the Gaza Strip militarily for months, then of course it's going to receive more and more critics from the Arab countries. Well, if you see what the leaders of the United Arab Emirates or Saudis or other countries said after the incident, the United Arab Emirates directly condemned Hamas. So even mentioned the name Hamas as a group in a negative way. But in the Saudi, Mohammed bin Salman and other Saudi leaders' declaration, we didn't see any reference on the Hamas as a terrorist group. Just the Saudis said that the Palestinian occupation should have ended and Israel should refrain itself to attack civilians. So it was, I would say, quite critical with Israel. United Arab Emirates was critical with Israel. However, there is a difference between the position of the United Arab Emirates and the Saudis. And definitely for the Iranians, it's a positive outcome of this conflict, because Iran is afraid of the Saudi nuclear program. Because behind the scenes, in my opinion, the main prize for the United States to have an agreement between the Israelis and the Saudis is to allow a Saudi civilian nuclear program, which of course is not in the interest of Iran to change, I would say, the strategic outlook of the whole Persian Gulf. So with a civilian nuclear program, I would say Iran's position could be weakened in the region. And for this reason, the Iranians try to stop any kind of negotiation between the Saudis and the Israelis. I expect that after this war, there could be a new wave of negotiations between Saudi Arabia and Israel. And I would not expect any break of Emiratis or Bahrainis relations with Israel, because a huge effort have been put in this relation with huge success. And I think both parts are responsible for this situation. So they believe that they can be independent from the Palestinian issue. And I think the lesson should have learned both by the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Israel, that they should address in a way the Palestinian situation and not to neglect this issue, because this negligence, I would say, this is what happened. But I think both the Emiratis and Bahrainis, they don't have any interest to break relations with Israel at this moment.
My last series of questions for today is what has the conflict strain been on the economies of Israel and Gaza so far? What influence have these events had on the world economy? And what influences can we expect in the near future?
Definitely, all wars are very expensive. For the region, there is, of course, a humanitarian cost. It's a huge death toll going on. It should be mentioned. However, on the economy, it's going to have a dangerous and disastrous effect. And especially in the case of Israel, we expect more devaluation of its national currency, the shekel. But we expect that credit rating of Israel could be turned to a negative. And definitely there is a need for a war budget. So always when we are discussing this unity government, it's not just about security coordination and political decision, but there should be a modified Israeli budget where they should replace some cost for this war. Well, we know the cost of the previous wars, but But I would say that this war is a very different one. So Israel has recently mobilized 300,000 reservists, which is going to have an impact on the economy in the short term, which means that those soldiers just left their workplaces. They need, of course, a salary to be paid from the Israeli budget. And definitely to buying and to receive more and more military equipments from the United States, it could cost a lot. But of course, there is a military aid provided by the United States as well. Definitely on the Gaza Strip, I would expect even more cost since the airstrike started. A lot of properties have been damaged and destroyed by the Israeli attacks very recently. Unfortunately, it's quite usual. We saw it regularly during the last Gaza conflicts. The last happened in May 2021 when Israelis attacked the Gaza Strip. And there is a need of reconstruction. And of course, there is a loss of jobs. So it could last long, and any case of military intervention that prolong the conflict and could increase the economic cost of the conflict, which we could even not estimate. Although there was an Israeli estimation about the potential cost, but I would say it's too early to find out the cost of this war. From the regional perspective, as I mentioned, the main problem, not only I would say the gas fields, but just think about the tourism issue. Israel's economy depending on tourism as well. But very recently we mentioned that 1 million Israeli tourists reached the United Arab Emirates within 3 years. At this moment, this whole tourism, which is I would say a regional potential, could stop for many months. Investments as well between Israel and the Arab states. So any regional trade which was quite inspiring during the last months could stop for years. For the global economy, of course, it's a kind about confidence and psychological effects and in all these war cases, like the oil prices increase, which in the short run is not bad for some of the countries in the region, like the Gulf countries like Saudi Arabia and Russia, of course. But after months, I would expect that oil prices could come down. And the same is true for the gas prices. And we are approaching the winter heating season now in Europe. And what we saw very recently, that there is an increase in the gas prices because of the lack of production in the Israeli Tamar gas field by approximately 29% since the beginning of the escalation between Israel and Hamas. And definitely it could somehow in a way to have an effect on the global inflation, which the whole world experienced at this moment. So it could have an impact on the European economy as well, because we will see on the prices of gas here in Europe, and it could affect the European economy in a way as well.
So not really good news for anyone. Well, thank you very much, Professor Csicsmann, for all these very important and vital insights. And I'm looking forward to all of our next podcasts to be made in the near future.
Thanks for the questions.
Thank you, dear listeners, for staying with us. And we're all looking forward to all of our next episodes. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to the Khayrion podcast. We are looking forward to sharing with you more exciting news on the politics and business of the Middle East, North Africa, and beyond. For further information, please follow us at khayrion.com, as well as on X and LinkedIn.